Welcome to Midpoint Monday on 88.5 FM and WMNF.org. I'm Seán Kinane. Today on Midpoint, we're going to hear about the end of the Florida legislative session, what bills passed in the last week, and what do Florida leaders think about it. That's coming up later in the show. First up, we're going to hear an update about what's become an explosive environmental controversy that's brewing at the University of South Florida in Tampa. If you'd like to email your thoughts, you can email us at dj@wmnf.org, or you can text 813-433-0885. If you do text, please sign your name. Well, students and faculty at USF are fighting back against the university releasing a request for information about offers to develop an area of wetlands and uplands north of the USF Tampa campus. It's a natural area that's north of Fletcher Avenue between the Hillsborough River and the USF Golf Course. And we're going to talk right now. Joining us live by Zoom is Jeannie Mounger. And Jeannie is a PhD candidate in the Integrative Biology Department at the University of South Florida. Welcome back to WMNF Midpoint, Jeannie.
Hi, thank you for having me again.
I'm glad you could come back on to give us an update. So some people may have missed our interview that happened about 3 weeks ago or so. What can you tell us about the USF Forest Preserve, but especially why you're concerned that there might be development there?
Sure. Well, we learned at the beginning of last month in April that the university had publicized a request for information for development proposals on what they call the northern property, which includes the USF Forest Preserve, the golf course, as well as USF Riverfront Park. And they did so without consulting with any stakeholders. They didn't notify the deans of the College of Arts and Sciences. They didn't notify the faculty or graduate students that sit on the USF Forest Preserve Steering Committee. This is a advisory board that oversees land management and research and education within the Forest Preserve. So internally, these stakeholders were not notified. And this was something that was developed by David Lechner, who's a senior vice president for business and financial strategy within USF, and approved by President Curl without input from the community or from experts.
And I should say that when I had you on last time, I invited USF on as well. They didn't accept my request for an interview, but I do want to read what they said because, their point here, that I think the main point is that it's just a request for information, that there's nothing definite that's going to happen. So let me read you what spokesperson Adam Friedman wrote in a statement to WMNF. He said, attached is a copy of the request for information. The primary goal of this RFI is for the university to explore options that might be available for the property. The RFI allows USF to gauge interest and obtain information to consider the best strategy for a potential project, such as the possibility of a ground lease that could provide greater financial resources to support the university's mission and benefit our students, faculty, and staff. However, USF is not required to take action on any of these proposals submitted by the developers. So does that give you any kind of consolation that, well, they could get some offers and then they could just turn them down?
It is not really a consolation, no. And a meeting took place after mounting public pressure between the administrators that were responsible for this RFI and the Forest Preserve Steering Committee. And what was essentially communicated in that meeting is that while the university wouldn't just accept any offer, they intoned that they have a price, and that if a developer met their price, that they would be content with destroying this research facility and this ecologically and culturally important property for the right dollar amount. Yeah.
And we'll talk more about the cultural and the environmental aspects of why you think this is important in just a second. But I want to remind people that we're speaking with Jeannie Mounger, a PhD candidate in the Integrative Biology Department at the University of South Florida. This is WMNF's Midpoint Monday. I'm Seán Kinane. It's 12:10 in the afternoon. If you'd like to email your questions, dj@wmnf.org. You can text 813-433-0885. Let's look at the area that we're talking about. But what I want to do is I want to start on the outsides in. on either side of the property, and these are included in the property. On one side is the Claw, the USF golf course. And so you can talk about that and what might happen there. But also on the other end, you mentioned earlier the riverfront park. So this is land that the university owns that's open to students and faculties usually to rent canoes or so forth, but it's closed to the public. So it's kind of this really special place right on the Hillsborough River that the university has access to, and the people involved at the university. So I'll have you tell me more about those two areas, and then we'll work toward the center.
Sure. Yeah. So the Claw is, of course, the university golf course, and that the Claw evidently is losing money, and this is sort of what initially began the development of this RFI. Was to see what sort of development could occur on the golf course. And then, of course, as I understand it, it became known to the administrators that this property was rather extensive, and there was another 120 acres of upland habitat that was potentially buildable, and that's the Forest Preserve and Riverfront Park. So the golf course is 118 acres, I believe, and more than just being a golf course, it also is a buffer zone for the wildlife that lives in the forest preserve. And we have some maps up. If you go to save.usf Forest Preserve on Instagram, we've put up some maps that show just how narrow it gets at Cypress Creek. So where this golf course is on the west end of the property, it abuts with several apartment complex developments, and Cypress Creek becomes very narrow at that point. So what you have is this pinch point essentially of this corridor, this wildlife corridor that heads all the way into the Cypress Creek floodplain. And actually, if you take a look at our maps, in the other direction toward the east, this whole piece of property is really the cornerstone that connects all the way through the Florida Wildlife Corridor. So we have documentation of lots of animals using the course in addition to using the forest preserve. And, unfortunately, some of that documentation does include roadkill. So we have seen otters, gopher tortoises, bobcats killed on the road. So we know that they are using the golf course in addition to the forest preserve as a green space. There was a project done by another doctoral candidate in our department looking at wading bird usage of retention ponds. And she documented numerous wading bird species, many of which are threatened. So roseate spoonbills and wood storks, little blue herons, et cetera, all use the golf course in addition to the forest preserve. And then Riverfront, as you said, Seán, is a really lovely recreational space for USF students, faculty, but also alumni. They're eligible to go in and use that. And you can rent canoes. It's a beautiful green space. There's a disc golf course and a ropes course. So it's also free. It's free to students and free to alumni. And it's one of the only free recreational outdoor spaces that USF students have in that area. So it's really important, I think, to USF community and culture and the health and prosperity of USF students.
And before we go any further, I want to remind people that we're speaking with Jeannie Mounger, a PhD candidate in the Integrative Biology Department at the University of South Florida. We're talking about the USF Forest Preserve and a request for information that the university has put out to potentially lease this land for development. And the riverfront park that you're talking about, many people may not have visited because it's part of USF and it's not open to the public, but I guarantee that most of our listeners have been right across the river there, which is Lettuce Lake Park. So this is the area that we're talking about. If you've been to Lettuce Lake Park, you know that area of the Hillsborough River, you know the beautiful wildlife that you can see at Lettuce Lake Park. Let's move on from either direction of the golf course and of the riverfront park and talk about the forest preserve itself, the uplands and the wetlands. How would you describe what's happening in there?
Well, primarily the forest preserve is a wetland. It's a cypress floodplain, and about 500 acres of the forest preserve are wetland, and then I believe it's 128 acres of upland. So if you were, and we actually just did, myself and some other doctoral candidates in my department did a trek along the corridor last weekend. And you can hike along the floodplain, you can hike along Cypress Creek, or you can come in. There's a gate we use for research and teaching to head straight in from the upland area. But it's really a incredibly beautiful cypress floodplain region, of course, full of bald cypress trees and Carolina ash, but it's a seasonally flooded wetland, just teeming with life. And, on any given day that I'm out hiking in the preserve, I see turtles and snakes. We have a family of otters, and I've snuck up on them a couple of times. They're always fun to see. So it is just a fabulous place for wildlife watching. And many people know this because Lettuce Lake Park as well is a really, really important place for ecotourism that happens within the Tampa Bay area. It's a place with really tremendous bird diversity. And part of that diversity at Lettuce Lake Park is also shared within the USF Forest Preserve. I've spoken to Mary Keith, who's the president of the Tampa chapter of Audubon Society, and she has helped get me numbers for this total wetland area, bird numbers. And there are almost 200 species of birds that have been recorded in this wetland. As I said before, there are a lot of wading birds in the wetland, but also it's really important for migratory birds. I think it's really special for the community to be able to come to Lettuce Lake Park, for instance, and have this huge wetland that they, can see a piece of. But the U.S. Forest Preserve remaining intact is important for these other places that people are able to get to publicly. And then, of course, if you move south, then you meet the uplands, and it's a mix of imperiled sandhill, scrub, and flatwoods habitat. All of these habitat types are imperiled because they have been the site of so much development already in Florida. So there are lots of endemic, native, and endangered and threatened plant species. As I said before, lots of reptiles, lots of mammals. There's really an incredible, incredible diversity of life out there.
And you mentioned earlier the Instagram account, which is at save.usf Forest Preserve. And in that Instagram account, you detail the trek that you were just mentioning, the exploration that you and some others did. And also you have photographs of some of the wildlife that you've seen there or have been captured by these wildlife cameras. So you've seen things like bobcats and otters. What are some of the other animals that people could see if they go to that Instagram account at save.usf Forest Preserve?
Yeah, so we teach mammalogy and comparative vertebrate anatomy in that natural classroom, and students have set up game cameras from semester to semester and captured, as I said, you can see, and all these pictures are on our Instagram account, bobcats, coyotes, white-tailed deer, wood storks. Let's see, what else have we seen? I'm sure I'm missing some, just all kinds of wildlife. Feral hogs, of course, they aren't native, but they're interesting to see nonetheless. They are out there and represent a big mammalian species. And lots of snakes, again, because we teach comparative vertebrate anatomy out there, we do have some sites set up to help facilitate our ability to see and interact with reptiles. So I know snakes aren't always people's favorite, but I think they're quite fascinating and wonderful and really important. And so we've seen king snakes and black racers, and I ran into a cottonmouth there the other day. So yeah, there's lots of stuff to see on our Instagram page if you aren't seeing it within the preserve itself.
Jeannie Mounger is a PhD candidate in the Integrative Biology Department at the University of South Florida. This is WMNF's Midpoint Monday. I'm Seán Kinane. It's 12:20 in the afternoon, and you're listening to 88.5 FM WMNF Tampa. You may be listening on WMNF.org, or you might be listening on the WMNF app. We're talking about the USF Forest Preserve and its ecological importance, and hopefully we'll talk in a second about its anthropological importance, perhaps, and the possibility that the University of South Florida might be soliciting suggestions to develop that land, or whether they've put out a request for information, and whether that will be developed or not is part of what this is about. So what can you say about, you talked a lot about the ecology and the biology there, but what about indigenous history there and anthropology in the USF Forest Preserve?
Yeah, well, it's extensive. One of the sites out there was first excavated by the Workers Project Administration, WPA, back in the 30s. So it's one of the most well excavated and well understood sites of indigenous cultural heritage within the state of Florida. It's a really significant site. And there are several other sites. There are sites on the golf course. There are sites on Riverfront Park as well. So the entire property is covered in significant cultural sites for indigenous heritage. And what I understand about those sites is that there's documentation of human habitation there for the last 10,000 years, basically continuous human habitation. So this would have gone back to the Tocobagans, but also the Seminole tribe. And there's a village site there, as well as several sites, burial sites. Some of these have been well explored, others have not. I think, the unfortunate reality is that I do not believe that the university has appropriately valued these sites, and I think it leaves them to be potentially exploited in a way that's devastating, frankly. And I think that the university is missing an opportunity to protect these sites appropriately. They're missing an opportunity to potentially allow the public to interact with them. I think that there are more imaginative ways to potentially develop the golf course that might bring the public in, and that would help protect and value these sites. Yeah.
So you're not completely opposed to any development in part of the area. It sounds like you might be in support of development in a particular way of the golf course. But what I think I'm hearing from you is saying that there's parts of this that just should not be touched at all.
Right. Yes, I think that the Forest Preserve, really, I think that if I'm being perfectly honest, that the golf course never should have been built in the first place. But that's not necessarily useful to say at this point. But I do think that if the golf course is losing money, as has been said by the administration, that, as I said, there are more imaginative ways to utilize that course in a way that doesn't include intensive development, that might include a park or an interpretive museum in some way that provides protection to the sites themselves, and also gives a community a way to interact with the cultural heritage and the ecology of the full northern property.
Our guest is Jeannie Mounger, a PhD candidate in the Integrative Biology Department at the University of South Florida. We're talking about the USF Forest Preserve. It's a plot of land that's north of Fletcher Avenue, just north of the USF Tampa main campus. And there's been a request for information put out by the university for requesting ideas for a possible ground lease of this area for development. The university says that it could reject all of the offers and not develop it at all. But we're bringing this issue to attention because this student and faculty-led campaign to try to stop the development. And one of the things I wanted to ask you, Jeannie, is since we last had you on a little less than a month ago, what has been developed? How has your your activism and your campaign. How has that progressed? And you have a protest that's or a demonstration that's coming up this coming Friday.
Yeah, we do. So I've been heartened by the community response. We have close to 19,000 signatures on our petition, and we have some social media outreach on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. We have a website as well, saveusfforestpreserve.com. I think it's been wonderful to share the preserve with the community, and the community has been really responsive to that. I think that we've been able to communicate just how valuable this property is as it stands. The varied kinds of values and importance that it has, I think we've been able to communicate. And yeah, there's really been an outpouring of support. However, and I think, well, let me say this, and I think that it has been that outpouring of support and that media pressure that is what spurred the administrators to have a meeting with the steering committee. I don't know that they would have done so without our letter writing campaign or our call campaign or our social media presence or media presence generally. However, the administration's response since then has not been encouraging necessarily. I think that I'm personally disappointed. However, I'm not surprised. There was acknowledgement, as I understand it, within that meeting that mistakes were made and that they failed to communicate with experts, they failed to communicate with stakeholders. However, they were steadfast in their refusal to rescind this RFI. And that I think is very concerning. You know, I think that they communicated that, as I said earlier in this interview, that they have a price that they're, willing to destroy this property for. And I know that they have said, we're just, exploring our options here. We don't have to do anything. Or, the other public comment has been, we can derive new tuition dollars and scholarship dollars from this potential development. But what I see are the tuition dollars and the scholarship dollars that are potentially lost by destroying this site. I think that they have really failed to understand just how valuable this land is as it remains. And, the university has said that they value sustainability. They've been in the news recently for a new global sustainability ranking. They're a Tree Campus USA. And yet all of these designations are tied up with this property that they are eyeing for development. So yeah, to answer your question about activism, I think that we've done a lot, but the fight continues. And based on this administration's response, I think that the only option we have is to move to demonstrate to the community, our commitment to protecting this property.
And that will be visible this Friday. What's going on?
Yeah, so we have a demonstration planned in front of the USF Forest Preserve at 6 p.m. this Friday, May 7th. And we invite the public to come out and show their solidarity with us in asking the university to act according to its own pledged commitments to sustainability and education. You can find our protest flyer on our social medias or on our website. And there's good parking information there as well. We'll be running a little shuttle and you can find information about that. We will be demonstrating on the road shoulder. So we're hoping to make it as safe as possible.
And that's on Fletcher Avenue, north of the Tampa campus.
Correct, yes.
Well, Jeannie, is there anything else that people should know about your campaign to help save the USF Forest Preserve, or to talk about how important it is? Anything that you'd like to add before I let you go?
Sure. Well, I'll say this, that if you aren't familiar with us or what our demands are, we're asking the university to rescind the RFI. We're also asking that they put a conservation easement on the property. Doing so would protect the property in perpetuity, but it would also be a tax windfall for the university. We're asking that they explore alternative options to development and protect this property. We're also asking that they employ a land manager at the preserve so that this site can be looked over in a way that is in keeping with their value system of education and sustainability.
And Jeannie, one of the things you mentioned reminded me of a question I haven't asked you during this interview. You mentioned that you hope that there will be a conservation easement there. How does that square with the stated goals of the university for the long-term management of this site?
Well, I think it squares well. And if you look at the master plan document that the university has set out for 2015 to 2025, you'll see that they acknowledge the importance of conservation lands. They even talk about expanding the greenway that they have. They claim to be committed to a carbon neutral future. They understand these commitments to LEED certification, and I think protecting this land, managing it properly, making sure that it remains as it is for future generations of not just USF students, but for future generations of Tampa Bay residents, absolutely squares with their own stated commitments to sustainability.
Well, Jeannie Mounger, thanks so much for coming on WMNF's Midpoint Monday today.
Thank you again for having me.
I appreciate you joining me. Jeannie Mounger is a PhD candidate in the Integrative Biology Department at the University of South Florida. She's helping to organize resistance to possible development of the USF Forest Reserve that's north of campus. You can find out more on their Instagram page at save.USF Forest Preserve. This is WMNF's Midpoint Monday. After this music break, we're going to hear about some major bills that have been passed by the Florida legislature in the last few days in session. So I hope you stay with us. If you'd like to call in, it's 8